Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Kavita Tyagi, consultant cardiologist from Sir Gangaram Hospital. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Gupta for inviting me for this privileged section. So I'll be going through the advances in interventional cardiology in my following slides. So what is interventional cardiology? Interventional cardiology is a subset of cardiology which deals with advances, the techniques which are specialized catheter-based techniques to diagnose, treat various types of coronary artery diseases, vascular diseases, structural heart disease, and congenital heart disease. So the various areas in which we deal with in interventional cardiology is acute coronary and chronic coronary syndrome, aortic aneurysm and dissections, transcutaneous aortic valve replacement, various arrhythmias, device closures like ASD, VSD, PFO, and ruptured sinus of Valsalva, then carotid artery angioplasty, then various ventricular assist devices, though all of them are not interventional, percutaneous valve repairs, and renal artery stenosis. So I'll be talking through various procedures. So first procedure I would like to talk about is transcutaneous aortic valve replacement. So we all know the aortic stenosis disease in which we start with severity of aortic stenosis, of course, and then we come to patient's age and we decide whether patient will receive tissue valve or mechanical valve. So for deciding this factor, we consider patient's age. If patient is less than 50, obviously patient will get mechanical. And if above 70 years of age, patient should get a tissue valve. And 50 to 70, it is a shared decision between a doctor and the patient. Among the patients who are more than 70, if patient is clearly more than 80, then we can or we should consider TAVR, transcutaneous aortic valve replacement. And if patient is less than 65, then surgical valve replacement is obviously a favored option. And between 65 to 80, it is again shared decision between physician and patient. So 32% of the patients are unsuitable for surgical valve replacement because of increased peri-procedural risk from multiple comorbidities which they develop by the age. A porcelain aorta, that is severely calcific aorta, or a patent left intramammary artery, which crosses the midline if patient has had previous CABG, increases the risk of conventional surgical valve replacement. So much so, at least 1/3 of patients with severe symptomatic aortic stenosis are not referred for or denied surgical therapy. So what is the option? Transcutaneous aortic valve replacement is the option for such people, depending on the age, depending on their comorbidities, and depending on sometimes a shared decision between doctor and patient. So let me take you through this transcutaneous aortic valve replacement. How do we do it? This is one 80-year-old lady, obviously with multiple comorbidities, and we take the patient on table. This is the pigtail catheter through left femoral artery. We take it this. And then this is the temporary pacemaker wire, which we put in RV through left femoral vein. So left groin, we take this pigtail catheter and temporary pacemaker wire. Then through right femoral artery, we take another puncture and we take another catheter, which is say Amplas catheter, through which we take this wire to the LV across this stenos aortic valve, which we can see. Then we take a further super stiff wire in LV through this catheter, and we negotiate the catheter over the wire. Then we exchange these wires and we take pigtail catheter through this hard wire. So this is the pigtail catheter. We can see in the LV through that or on this hard stiff wire. So now we have two pigtail catheters. One is this in LV, another is in aorta. Now this is a balloon labeled as Mammoth 20 into 40 millimeter over this extra stiff wire across aortic valve. And when we have to inflate it, we start pacing, for which we had put this temporary pacemaker at the rate of maybe 180 beats per minute. And we open this stenosed aortic valve before we implant aortic valve on this aortic stenosic area. Now through the navigator, this 26 into 30 millimeter valve delivery system, my valve 26 millimeter has been taken through this delivery system across to deliver across aortic valve. Now this is the valve placed across stenosed aortic valve. This is the pigtail which was placed in aortic root. So this aortogram shows the position of this valve, and for deployment, again we start pacing at a rate of 180 beats per minute, and we can see that this balloon is inflating, which is inside valve, and this valve is being deployed across aortic valve. Then we give dye, we inject in this aortic root to see whether there is any coronary sinus obstruction, any pericardial effusion, or any aortic regurgitation. So there is none, we can see it clearly, and patient is taken off OT table or cath lab table happily in a hemodynamically stable state. So this is the procedure of transcutaneous aortic valve replacement, which is done in cath lab, and some people prefer it under sedation. Some people prefer it under general anesthesia, depending on patient's condition, but this is how this is done. Now next, in line with transcutaneous aortic valve replacement, I'll talk a word about percutaneous pulmonary valve implantation. So this is an established therapy for pulmonary regurgitation and RVOT obstruction in post-op patients with TOF and pulmonary atresia. This was a stent-based expandable pulmonary valve designed by Dr. Bonhoeffer. It was named Melody valve by this company, and it uses a glutaraldehyde treated bovine venous jugular valve sewn into a balloon expandable stent. This valve has been implanted in more than 1,000 cases, 10,000 cases so far. So this is the Melody valve, how it looks like. And this is RVOT obstruction. This valve is deployed across this and helps to relieve this stenosis as well as to overcome that pulmonary regurgitation. Now next intervention, advances in intervention I would like to talk to you all is about left bundle branch pacing. So left bundle branch pacing, what is new about it and what is the need of it? So we know that right ventricle pacing is done by our conventional dual chamber or single chamber permanent pacemakers. And this RV pacing causes LV mechanical dyssynchrony, which leads to systolic and diastolic dysfunction, mitral regurgitation, increased LA diameter over time, and eventually it induces atrial fibrillation, episodes of heart failure, etc. So there were various studies done, example, a few. This Dutch follow-up study, every 10% increase in percentage right ventricular pacing is associated with an 8% risk of heart failure deaths. Algorithms for minimizing ventricular pacing, we know they are there in the dual chamber pacemakers. They reduce the percentage of right ventricular pacing. However, in AV block patients, we know that some amount of RV pacing has to be there. So what is the option? Now, LBP has emerged as an alternative method for delivering physiological pacing to achieve electrical synchrony of LV especially in patients with infranodal AV block and left bundle branch block. We know that proximal left bundle branch run through LV septum and fan out to form a wider target for pacing compared to the His bundle. So to share this case with you, this patient had recurrent syncope, dilated cardiomyopathy with EF of 35%, coronary arteries, single vessel disease, distal LV disease, not to be done anything much, then functional MR and LVB, essential hypertension, diabetes, CKD stage 3, to name it, other comorbidities. This is pre-left bundle branch pacing ECG, as we can see, clear-cut LVB. So this is how we start the procedure. This is a quadripolar catheter put in RV. This is a quadripolar catheter which senses the position of His in septum. This is the sheath taken to take the left bundle pacing lead. This is the sheath placement. And through this sheath, this is left bundle branch pacing lead across septum. There are various criteria, how much it is to be taken inside and how much it is to be kept outside, etc. There is a die given which demarcates this septum clearly. So this shows that it is inside our septum. Then by deciding various parameters, the distances, we define where this lead is to be placed, and accordingly it is connected. So that was left bundle branch pacing. Next thing is ventricular assist devices. So what are the ventricular assist devices and why do we need them? So we know patients, cardiac patients in cardiogenic shock, we know them during acute MI or otherwise very low EF. We often encounter the patients with cardiogenic shock. So when to consider short-term mechanical cardiac support devices? So to name a few, we have cardiac inotropes, we have IABP, we have Impella, we have VA ECMO, we have LVAD or RVAD alone, and we have BiVAD, that is CentriMed. Now, if we go through this picture, so temporary support choices we decide depending on whether our patient is getting enough oxygenation or not. If yes, then we will decide percutaneously. We can do is IABP, Impella, and tandem heart. Surgically, we can take help of our surgical colleagues for CentriMed and ABiomed, etc. If patient is not maintaining adequate oxygenation, then percutaneously we can go in for ECMO and tandem heart, and surgically we can go for ECMO. So this is our algorithm to decide on which mechanical cardiac support our patient can be given during cardiogenic shock. However, cost is a huge factor in deciding this. It is not such a simple thing. So this is a patient taken for angiography, presented with acute antiviral MI and cardiogenic shock. So we can see that there is a stent thrombosis, occlusion of LAD, mid-LAD, and patient was in cardiogenic shock. So immediately, this was the IABP, which was put. Patient was tried to be stabilized. So that is how the IABP looks like. Next is Impella. So Impella is continuous non-pulsatile axial flow Archimedes screw pump. Active support by expelling aspirated blood from LV into ascending aorta. Does not require ECG or RTL waveform triggering. Stability even in tachyarrhythmias or electromechanical dissociation, because it has its pump which takes the blood from LV and pumps it into aorta. So whatever rhythm is, it keeps on doing its job at its own rate. 6.4 millimeter device can do this job for 4.2 to 5 liters per minute output it can give, and 4 millimeter device can take 2.5 liters per minute of output at a 25,000 revolutions per minute. So now this is the Impella, how it looks like. This is an LV, and this is the pump, and through this it exits the blood into ascending aorta. So whatever LV condition is there, our aorta keeps on getting the blood, and so is the perfusion in the body. So fluoroscopically, it looks like this Impella. However, Impella is very costly and not everybody can afford it. Now, just to name a few, these are surgical placed VETs, and they're very highly specialized and very costly devices. And they are mechanical supports basically, and they are almost, so that is how the pump generated, and some part of it inside LV and some part of it outside. And that is how the HeartMate 2 and HeartMate 3, very small pump size device, which is fixed into the LV from outside. So that is, these are the advances which are available for patients with very, very poor LV dysfunction. Now coming to some advances in our intervention cardiology pertaining to our percutaneous coronary interventions, that is our PTCAs or PCIs. So we have now IVUS, we have our OCTs. So I'll show you some patient having IVUS guided left main PCI. So we all know left main is lifeline. So this is our patient, 75 years male, angina on exertion for last 2 to 3 months, BP borderline 110/60 and pulse is 52. So if we go through the guidelines, left main CAD. So left main disease with low syntax score, that is 0 to 22, has class 1A indication for CABG as well as PCI. Left main with intermediate syntax score, CABG is of course class 1A indication in all the 3 subsets, and 2A, that is it can be considered or it can be reasonable in cases of if we consider PCI for such patients also. So now we have this patient. So we can see that it is the left main ostium through which it is just hanging around, and it is the right coronary artery, which is say normal. And as soon as we inject dye into left system, patient's blood pressure falls down significantly and patient starts having pain. So after taking 1 injection, we immediately stop the angiography and we take urgent consent, we take and we start support in the form of inotropes and we start the procedure. So this is the wire put in LCX. It was such a tight disease that the wire could not be negotiated to LED, and in LCX the wire was put. Then this is the balloon, which was used to dilate left main coronary ostium. And then after first dilatation, the wire was put in LED as well as LCX, and this is the cutting balloon angiosculpt, because we can see lots of calcium in left main. So this cutting balloon is used. And then we have taken the IVUS left main to LED to assess the size of the left main and the calcification and the lumen, etc. So this is the run of IVUS in which we can see calcification, we can see the lumen, and we can see our landing zone in cases of angioplasties. So this is how the calcium looks like. This is the side branch, and we can see the lumen of artery, which has been narrowed very, very significantly, and we can see the calcium all around. So now after doing this pre-dilatation, we take the stent, and post-stent, we see the deployment of stent, and if there is any poor apposition to the valve, all these things we see. Then further, this is the final outcome. So we can see this left main, which was done with the help of IVUS in a reasonably fair manner. So this IVUS has its advantage in the form of that extra dye is not given. In fact, people are utilizing this modality for doing very minimal dye very minimal contrast PCIs, or in fact no dye or no contrast PCIs also, because what they see, the landing zone, the balloon expansion, everything, stent expansion, they see through this IVUS. So very important help for angioplasties. Now next modality, which is increasingly being used for refining our angioplasties, is OCT, that is optical coherence tomography. I'll show you some interesting examples of OCT. And these are just theoretical pictures that the thrombus in OCT looks like this, beautiful pictures of OCT, and thrombus in IVUS looks like that. So obviously the visibility makes a whole lot of difference between IVUS and OCT. But the main problem with OCT is that we have to give lots of dye. So we can see the difference, the plaque rupture, the discontinuity of fibrous cap overlying a lipid-rich core in acute cases. There may be thrombus, but in all ruptured plaque or treated with anticoagulation, there is no thrombus. Now this is the patient. This is a 45-year male who had just one episode of chest heaviness and giddiness 15 days before admission. ECG showed that time some intermittent 2:1 and some conduction blocks. So we did first EPS RFA, sorry, not RFA, only EPS. And we found there was an infra-ECG conduction blocks. So we put a pacemaker. However, patient complained of some chest discomfort, which was noticed that time also. So we decided to have a look in the coronaries, and we saw this is the RCA. You can see a possibly not very significant stenosis, and we were just not able to decide that what is to be done for this next. So OCT came to our help, and this is the OCT we are doing, and this is the OCT run. So you will see very interesting things we could find. These are the branches which came, and huge area of dissection and thrombus, which was seen over that seemingly insignificant, seemingly not critical stenosis. So that was the lesion. So we decided to put a stent, and we did ballooning, we did angioplasty, and we did the post dilatation. And again, we took a OCT run. So we can see that it is clearly, nicely deployed stent. So that is the importance of OCT in helping angioplasties. We see the length of the stent required, we see the diameter of the stent required, and we see the morphology of the plaque, we see the area achieved through the stent, and we see if there is an S dissection or any other problem before or after angioplasty. So that is the technique of OCT. Now next procedure is mitra clip, obviously very costly also, but is being done nowadays in many centers. And 2017 guidelines, they have given 2BB recommendation. It can be considered for severely symptomatic patients with chronic severe primary MR who have favorable anatomy for the repair procedure and a reasonable life expectancy, but who have a prohibitive surgical risk because of severe comorbidities and remain severely symptomatic despite optimal guideline-directed medical therapy for heart failure. So this is our place for mitra clip. So there were initial studies, say mitra FR, the conclusion of which said that among patients with severe secondary MR, the rate of death or unplanned hospitalization for heart failure at 1 year didn't differ between patients who underwent percutaneous repair, in addition to receiving medical therapy, and those who received medical therapy alone. However, this co-opt investigator, they concluded that among patients with heart failure and moderate to severe or severe secondary MR, who remained symptomatic despite the use of maximal dose of GGMT, transcatheter repair resulted in lower rate of hospitalization for heart failure and lower all-cause mortality within 24 months of follow-up than medical therapy alone. So who are the patients and what are the anatomical criteria? So there are few like And there should be sufficient leaflet tissue for mechanical coaptation, and rheumatic disease, endocarditic valve, or should not be there, and calcification. Anatomic considerations like flail gap should be less than 10 millimeter, coaptation depth less than 11 millimeter, flail width less than 15 millimeter, mitral area gradient more than 4 centimeters square, oblique less than 4 millimeter mercury, not more than 5 millimeters, and coaptation length more than 2 millimeter, as we can see in these diagrams. This is types of mitral regurgitation which are considered for various, which are dealt with either surgical or through mitral clip. So this is how the mitral clip looks like. This is the very compact delivery system, and this is how it is assembled. It is done under the guidance of transesophageal echocardiography, and this is the delivery system which is taking mitral clip through this, and this is how the mitral clip . So these are the mitral clips which are being applied through this delivery system. Now, next is transcatheter tricuspid valve intervention coaptation devices. So what are these? So we know that the patients with chronic tricuspid regurgitation, they have been managed medically, leading to gradual annular dilatation and end stage RV failure. We have seen many of the patients, especially rheumatic heart disease, especially in people, mitral valve replacement has been done, and in them, the tricuspid regurgitation keeps on growing, keeps on increasing, and it eventually leads to RV failure. And the benefit of mitral valve replacement is also lost in ensuing years. So it is functional in more than 80% of cases, occurring frequently in patients with treated left side valvular disease. Surgical TR replacement or repair associated with increased operative risk, reaching an in-hospital mortality of about 10%. And the higher risk is mainly related to the late referral to surgery of patients with severe tricuspid regurgitation. So the management of isolated TR represents an unmet clinical need that has led to development of transcatheter tricuspid valve intervention. And it is classified according to the mechanism of action as follows: annuloplasty, cable stent devices, tricuspid valve replacement, and coaptation devices. So these are the devices available for our severe tricuspid regurgitation after mitral valve or left-sided disease involvement. So this is the mitral clip illustration, and this is the echo done after this mitral clip is done through tricuspid valve. This is the Pascal system, and we can see in echo, this is the Forma system, which is placed across tricuspid valve, and tricuspid regurgitation is reduced. Now coming to device therapy in cardiac arrhythmias. So cardiac arrhythmias, we have bradyarrhythmias, we have tachyarrhythmias, and the patients who are considered for anti-bradycardia therapy, that is pacemaker therapy, either they have persistent bradycardia or they have intermittent bradycardia. So persistent bradycardia, it could be sinus node disease, it could be AV block. We can find the people in sinus rhythm, atrial fibrillation. Intermittent bradycardia people, either we can document or sometimes they are just suspected and ECG is not documented. However, bundle branch block, reflex syncope, unexplained syncope, these are the common findings we can get. And ECG documented, either intrinsic or extrinsic. So in cases of intrinsic, we can find paroxysmal AV block, SA block, sinus arrest, bradykardia of sinus, atrial fibrillation with slow ventricular rate. And for extrinsic, we can have vagal-induced sinus arrest or AV block and idiopathic AV block, example adenosine. However, in most of the cases, it is reversible. And reflex syncope, carotid sinus or tilt-induced could be the picture. Now, bundle branch block and unexplained syncope, if patient's EF is less than 35%, then we need to consider either intracardiac defibrillator or cardiac resynchronization therapy with defibrillator. If people have patients more than 35% of EF, then we need to further analyze these patients, like carotid sinus massage, or we need to do electrophysiological studies for studying the various velocities, let's say AH or HV intervals. And if it is negative, then we can consider ILR or maybe very intermittent episodes. And then we can decide about the appropriate therapy. And if all these things are negative, then obviously we need to do the clinical follow-up of further event. So pacemakers, as we know, they provide a rate to support to metabolic needs. And this is the pacemaker, very tiny size nowadays, in fact, and provides various diagnostics. As far as the battery life is concerned, it goes for 8 to 10 years, depending on the need of the patient. And some few of the new pacemakers, they can terminate atrial tachycardia and atrial fibrillation as well. So we have one more thing, new thing that is in this pacemaker line, that is Micra. And this is a new opportunity to reduce complications associated with traditional pacing technology, because pocket-related complications are common. 8% at 5 years with traditional techniques. Infection, hematoma, erosion, we see them. Lead-related complications, 11% at 5 years with traditional technology, like these lead dislodgements, insulation breaches, venous thrombosis and obstruction, etc. So Micra is a way out of it. Now we do pacing for improving LV function, that is ventricular dyssynchrony. So we know that achieving cardiac resynchronization is atrium lead, the RV lead, and the LV lead through coronary sinus. So this is a very broad QRS complex. And when we synchronize LV and RV pacing, this is how narrow complexes we get, which improves or which is likely to improve the LV contractions, LV efficiencies. By pacing from both the right and left ventricles, CRT may improve EF and reduce patient symptoms of recurrent heart failure, so on and so forth. So this is our battery pulse generator, and this is our LV lead, placed mostly in posterolateral vein of LV. In AICDs, this is our pulse generator. This is superior vena cava coil, and this is RV coil for giving a defibrillation therapy. So now what is new in this? MRI compatible pacemakers we have, leadless pacemakers we have, as I showed in my previous slide. And we have now subcutaneous implantable ICDs. Then these leadless pacemakers, very small in size, like this, and implanted percutaneously. And obviously the pocket hematoma, the pocket infections, etc., chances are minimized. Now coming to the remote monitoring, that is patient gets a device, patient goes home, and patient gets connected through web server, through a Bluetooth device, and wherein patient's all parameters, or if patient has had some tachycardias, then the physician, the doctor treating the patient, will get the update. And so device battery management will be better, and other things like fluid retention, etc., can be managed better with these remote monitoring therapies. Now I talked about indications and use of wearable cardiac defibrillator, wherein patient is given, this is the wearable, this is a LifeVest model, and this is the A is garment and elastic belt with the connected monitor and defibrillator unit. And this are the worn by patient, and these are the two back defibrillator electrodes and ECG recording electrodes mounted on the elastic belt. So that is how this wearable it looks like. Now coming to the cases wherein somebody has very calcified arteries, but patient is not willing for bypass, or patient is having so many comorbidities that it is not very safe for him to undergo CABG. So we had this patient, 80-year-old lady, angina, essential hypertension, normal LV function. We take the patient for angiogram, and we can see RCA is tortuous and hugely calcified. So we decide rota, and that is how we do rota ablation. We take first our routine workhorse wire, then we take a microcatheter, and then we take rota floppy guide wire through that. Then we take a rota burr, and obviously we put a temporary pacemaker before doing rota. And this is the burr going through the calcified area. This was a rota burr 1.5 millimeter, and we do the rotational atherectomy with the help of this burr. So rotational atherectomy was introduced more than 30 years ago to debulk and modify atherosclerotic plaque as an alternative or adjunctive strategy to percutaneous balloon angioplasty. And it can selectively ablate inelastic calcific atheroma. It spares elastic vascular tissue, and it can also generate microparticles that propagate distally in coronary vessel with consequent vascular plaguing, slow flow or no flow, and increase in myocardial specific enzymes. So then after doing rota ablation, we again change our routine workhorse wire. Rota floppy wire is removed through fine cross microcatheter, and SAN blue guide wire was taken again to the distal RCA. Then we dilate the RCA lesions and we deploy the stent, that is 3x48. This is the stent deployment picture, and this was the final result, beautifully made or crafted rather RCA. So what do we do in calcified lesions? So we have a specified algorithm for this. When we do coronary angiography, moderate to severe calcification, so we do imaging, either IVUS or OCT, depending on the creatinine or the amount of dye we can give. So if calcium arc is 180 to 270, it gives us 2 points, more than 270, 3 points, and calcium length more than 5 millimeter, 1 or 2 points, and thickness more than 0.5, that is 1 point. So if patient is having 1 to 2 points, then high or very high pressure non-compliant balloons. If patient is having 3 to 5 points, then we go for lithotripsy. However, if it doesn't cross, then we do rotational atherectomy or orbital atherectomy. After that, if there is a mild calcification, if there is a balloon dilatation is possible, then we see whether it is optimum balloon dilatation, and we accordingly choose our lithotripsy or further steps. Or stent implantation, optimization with IVUS and OCT, we do. So basically, to break the calcium or to handle the calcium inside the arteries, we first assess the arc of calcium, the thickness of calcium, the length of calcium in the coronary arteries with the help of IVUS or OCT. Then we decide whether high pressure non-compliant balloon is to be used, whether cutting balloon is to be used, or whether lithotripsy, rotational atherectomy or orbital atherectomy is to be used. Lithotripsy is very costly, and rotational atherectomy is very handy. However, it is also costly, but it is used often. So what is this intravascular lithotripsy? It is shockwave intravascular lithotripsy for calcified coronaries, and this is how it goes. Now coming to defect occluder devices. So we have many of them, like this is Emplaza septal occluder. Then this is Occlutech Fibula Flex 2 device. This is Gore Cardioform septal occluder. So on and so forth. Multiple devices with the small differences in their properties for different sizes of devices. So these are the things to occlude various atrial septal defects, ventral septal defects, the PFOs and RSOVs. Now coming to the left atrial appendage occlusion. In case of atrial fibrillation, wherein the burden of thrombus or the propensity of thrombus, the likelihood of thrombus is very high, and anticoagulant is either not, cannot be given because of some absolute contraindications, or patient is having repeated thromboembolic episode. So we have many of them now. To name example, this is Lariat device that is FDA approved, with the help of which we have other devices like this Plateau device, Watchman device, and amulet device, etc. Occlude left atrial appendage. So these are the left atrial appendage occluded devices. So this was the list of a few advances in interventional cardiology to share with you all. Thank you so much. Thank you for patient hearing.